everyone. My name is Bryn Coldrick. I'm a cultural heritage consultant with Archaeological Management Solutions. We're an independent consultancy based in Kilrush, County Clare. The title of this paper is When Memory Sets Hard, Civil War Graffiti on Mountrivers Bridge. This paper was first presented as an illustrated talk for Heritage Week 2019 at the County Museum in Ennis, County Clare. It was organised by the museum with the cooperation of Transport Infrastructure Ireland, who funded the work that this paper is based on. I was asked to record it for Heritage Week 2021, which I'm very happy to do. It will be hosted online by the Clare Museum and will also be available on AMS's YouTube channel.
Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge and thank a number of people who helped with the work and the paper. They include colleagues from AMS, Archaeological Consultancy Services Unit, ACSU, and John Cronin Associates. The TII project archaeologist Richard O'Brien, who oversaw the works and encouraged us to tell the story, staff from the Clare Museum and Clare Local Studies Library, and local historians who helped with the research. I'd particularly like to mention Owen Shanahan, who very generously shared his own research with us while we were writing this paper. I'd also like to acknowledge Clare County Council, who commissioned the work as part of the Kerry and Clare Bridges Rehabilitation Scheme. Finally, I want to acknowledge Pádraig O'Rourke. Although he was not involved with the project, his 2009 book, Blood on the Banner, formed the basis of much of the history I'm about to relate, alongside contributions by Owen Shanahan and Joe Power. This paper relates to work that AMS and ACSU were involved with in 2018, when Mountrivers Bridge in County Clare was demolished and replaced to improve road safety. Mountrivers Bridge, also known as Skivaleen Bridge, is located 2 kilometres east of Doonbeg in West County Clare. It carries the main Doonbeg to Milltown Malbay Road, the N67, over the Cree or Skivaleen River, between the townlands of Mountrivers and Carraphoenix South. Under the scheme, Dysart Bridge near Castle Island, County Kerry, was also demolished, and 2 other Kerry bridges were widened, namely Ballynamona Upper Bridge near Castlemaine and Bahina Bridge near Barraduff. Mountrivers Bridge was a 3-span humpback limestone bridge built in the 18th century to improve road communication between the towns of Doonbeg and Ennis. A built heritage assessment carried out prior to its demolition concluded that it lacked any special architectural or decorative trappings, and that repair works carried out during the 20th century had diminished its architectural, historical, and aesthetic significance. The limestone parapet walls had mostly cast concrete capping, and the parapets of the approach walls on both sides were constructed and repaired with a mixture of rubble limestone and concrete blocks. Several episodes of repair and minor reconstructions were apparent, and these were attributed to vehicle collisions. Indeed, the large number of accidents that occurred here, some of which were fatal, had led the local newspaper, the Clare Champion, to dub Mountrivers Bridge the Bridge of Sighs. Before its demolition, several types of heritage survey were carried out on and around the bridge, including a terrestrial LiDAR survey, a weight and metal detection survey within the water channel, archaeological testing, and an architectural heritage survey. This survey by ACSU recorded the bridge for posterity through written descriptions, drawings, and photography. And it was during this work that some interesting graffiti was discovered on the concrete coping of the parapet wall on the northwest facing elevation of the bridge. The words Free Stater had been etched into the cement when it was still wet, altering a set of initials, BF, which had just been inscribed. The initials TB had also been written into the cement on the south parapet coping. AMS was retained by TII and Kerry County Council to undertake archaeological monitoring of the demolition works. Given its historical interest, the section of the parapet's concrete coping bearing the Free Stater graffiti was carefully removed for analysis, storage, and future display. The National Museum of Ireland was notified, and they concluded that the piece should be considered an archaeological object under the National Monuments Act. This is a tracing of the Civil War graffiti carried out by Ross and Whaldoon of AMS. And here is a still from a 3D digital model that Ross made using photogrammetry. You can go to Sketchfab at the link on the screen, where you can rotate and zoom in on this digital model. The image gives a good view of the original initials, BF, and how they were altered to make the Free Stater inscription. There was also lettering above the words Free Stater, but unfortunately this is illegible. So naturally, we were all intrigued by this find, and were eager to carry out further historical research with the assistance of local historians and others to try to find out more about the graffiti, its historical context, and its significance to the local community. We knew from the outset that the identity of BF may never be known for certain, and that there may still be local sensitivities that we'd need to be cautious of. However, the term Free Stater is undoubtedly a reference to the Irish Civil War, and it tells us something about the more recent history of the area and the bridge itself that was worth looking into. The Civil War is one of the darkest periods in our nation's history, a conflict that split families and turned former comrades into bitter enemies. On one side was the new National Army of the Irish Free State. This side supported the treaty that was signed with the British in December 1921, which brought an end to the War of Independence. On the other side were the irregulars, or anti-treaty IRA, who considered the treaty a betrayal of the Republican struggle. The brutality of the Civil War was worse than had been seen during the War of Independence, or Anglo-Irish War, that preceded it. The fact made all the more tragic, given that the combatants had not only been brothers in arms, but were often literally brothers. Throughout the War of Independence, which took place from 1919 to 1921, County Clare had been one of the strongest Republican areas, with 3 Clare brigades of the IRA at the forefront of the struggle from the beginning. Although the county had not risen in 1916, 2 years later it was declared a special military area, with local volunteers drilling and training in secret in preparation for the confrontation to come. The IRA in Clare would inflict more than twice as many fatalities on the British forces than the British would on the IRA. Compared to the Mid and East Clare brigade areas, which bore the brunt of the fighting, West Clare was relatively quiet during the Anglo-Irish War. Nevertheless, there were some notable incidents. When the war got underway in 1919, the IRA began to attack Royal Irish Constabulary barracks and patrols to obtain weapons and ammunition. Smaller installations were abandoned as the RIC relocated to larger towns with stronger barracks. The RIC barracks in Doonbeg was abandoned in August 1919 and burned by the IRA shortly afterwards. Soon, large districts of the county had no RIC or military presence, which meant that the volunteers could train and operate freely. The following year, the RIC were reinforced by the notorious Black and Tans and the auxiliaries, which were formed from the ranks of the British Army. At the same time, the Republicans became increasingly organized and daring, as demonstrated by the Renine ambush on the 22nd of September 1920, when the IRA attacked an RIC and Black and Tan patrol. This was the first major attack on British forces in the area and left 5 policemen and their Black and Tan driver dead. That same morning, resident magistrate Captain Alan Lendrum was ambushed and killed by IRA volunteers at Caherphoenix, 2 miles from Doonbeg. Historian Owen Shanahan has written that the circumstances of Lendrum's death became distorted and used in anti-IRA propaganda for almost a century. Minutes before he was ambushed, Lendrum had crossed eastwards over Mountrivers Bridge in his Ford motorcar. Some weeks later, one of the ambushers, James Nealon, who lived close to the bridge, crossed westwards over the same bridge as a wanted man en route to Doonbeg train station before emigrating to Chicago, never to return. In response to the Renine ambush and the disappearance of Lendrum, Crown forces burned hay and cabins all along the western seaboard, from Cree through Doonbeg to Kilkee, as well as shops, pubs and houses in Lahinch, Ennis and Milton Mabbe. 6 civilians were killed or fatally injured during these reprisals. Shortly afterwards, IRA Brigade Chief of Police William Shanahan from Doomore, Doonbeg, was captured by the British at Doonbeg, along with another local volunteer, Michael McNamara of Mountrivers. they were taken to Kilrush, where they were beaten and tortured for 5 days and brutally killed. They were buried side by side in Doonbeg graveyard on Christmas Day 1920. The football pitch in Doonbeg is now named after them, and there is a monument to them at the entrance to the club. On the 16th of June 1921, a local teacher, who had been blamed for providing the information that led to their arrest, was escorted westwards across Mountrivers Bridge to Doonbeg, where he was executed as a spy. This episode has been omitted from some Doonbeg local histories, written in the 1990s and early 2000s, which illustrates the sensitivity surrounding these violent incidents, even a century later. Other atrocities committed by British forces in Clare included the Killaloe Bridge murders, where 3 volunteers were executed without trial, and the killing of 3 men and wounding of 7 in Milltown Malbay. Atrocities such as these led the population to become increasingly hostile towards the RIC and had a lasting effect on the people of West Clare. By July 1921, stalemate existed between the IRA and British forces, and a truce was declared. In contrast to IRA command in Dublin, local commanders in Clare felt that they were winning the war and could carry on fighting. The truce brought an end to the momentum of the Republican struggle in Clare and a decline in discipline within the ranks of the local IRA. Despite the truce, the violence between the British forces and the local population was not over. There were bitter scenes during the British withdrawal from barracks in Clare, particularly at Ennis, where an RIC constable threw a grenade at a group of children and teenagers, wounding 18. 2 black and tans were later shot dead in Lisdoonvarna in reprisal. However, the truce was otherwise observed in West Clare. The truce was followed by the Anglo-Irish Treaty, signed on the 6th of December 1921, which led to the creation of the Irish Free State, and eventually to what we now know as the Republic of Ireland. But in 1922, the majority of IRA volunteers throughout the country were opposed to the treaty due to the compromises it contained, and committed Republicans saw it as a betrayal of everything that they had fought for. They regarded those who were ready to accept the treaty, the Free Staters, as traitors. The IRA formally rejected the treaty on the 26th of March 1922. The East Clare Brigade supported the treaty, but their comrades in West and Mid Clare were opposed. The first shots of the Civil War were fired at the forecourts in Dublin on the 28th of June 1922, when Free State forces used British artillery against the IRA volunteers who had barricaded themselves inside, which included members of the West Clare Brigade. Sorry, I should correct myself, the Mid Clare Brigade. In the weeks and months that followed, clashes occurred between the IRA and the new Free State Army, who moved to take control of abandoned RIC barracks and other positions. Initially, the IRA had almost complete control of the West Coast and had the advantages of knowing the local area and its people. In contrast, the soldiers of the Free State were outnumbered and operating in unfamiliar territory, but they were well armed with weapons, artillery, armoured cars, and other equipment supplied by the British. The IRA attacked Free State positions and convoys and took the towns of Kilrush and Kilkee, and temporarily halted the Free State's activities in the area by destroying the railway bridge at Doonbeg. Towards the end of July, however, the Free State forces had cleared the Republicans from Kilrush and Kilkee, and by the end of August, they were firmly in control of Clare and held barracks in various towns, including Kilkee. The anti-treaty volunteers continued to engage in guerrilla warfare, causing significant damage to infrastructure, especially in West Clare, by blowing up bridges, trenching roads, and tearing up railway lines and sleepers to disrupt train communications to and from Ennis. Road bridges were included in this campaign of sabotage, and the Free State Army and local government had to continually repair them. It seems that Mountrivers Bridge was blown up in or shortly before August 1923, which is the date of this photograph. Special thanks are due to Owen Shanahan and to Mary Driver for sharing this picture with us. Mountrivers Bridge was certainly not a unique incident. An ongoing project entitled The Archaeology of Conflict, Wexford in the Civil War 1922-23, has uncovered over 70 bridges in County Wexford that were damaged or destroyed during this period. This project has been overseen by archaeologists Colin Moriarty and Catherine McLaughlin, with funding from Wexford County Council. Moriarty notes that bridges were typically blown up with explosives, but occasionally more rudimentary methods were used, such as excavating trenches across the bridge span and knocking down parapet walls. Sometimes bridges were completely destroyed, while in other instances they were only partially damaged. Repairs were often carried out by local masons using the same building material, usually stone and mortar, which often makes it difficult to distinguish the repair work. In other instances, such as Mountrivers, poured concrete was used, which stood out in stark contrast to earlier stonework. Even when repairs were successful, they often didn't last long, as the IRA returned and damaged the bridges again. O'Rourke wrote that as Republican resistance continued and casualties grew increasingly heavy, Free State troops resorted to what he described as a campaign of terror, as brutal and cold-blooded as any atrocities the British forces had ever committed. By spring 1923, the Free State had all but won the war, and the IRA declared a ceasefire on the 25th of April. The Free State continued the executions, however, with 2 Clare men, the last to be officially executed, though unofficial murders continued for months afterwards. With this record, and 1,500 dead from both sides, it is not surprising that bitter divisions remained for decades, and that memories of what happened lasted through the generations. Kennelly concluded that the bitterness and hostility of the Civil War in Clare finally ended during World War II with the formation of the local defence force. But it's telling that the Civil War period is not dealt with in some local historical literature, and because of the sensitivities involved, it remains a topic that many would rather avoid. Most published works dealing with this period of Clare's history focus on the War of Independence, with little, if anything, published on the Civil War. As I mentioned, some Doonbeg local histories avoid discussing this period altogether, while others make only passing references. And one reason for this must surely be the level of trauma inflicted by both sides, which remained long in the memories of those involved and their families. O'Rourke points out that the Free State forces applied tactics against Republicans akin to those used by the British during the War of Independence, including press censorship, executions, and denial of prisoner of war status to Republican prisoners. The number of Republicans executed by the Free State during and after the Civil War far outweighed the official British executions of Republicans in 1920 to 21. And like the British before them, the Free State government condemned Republican actions as those of murderers and criminals. No wonder then that in the eyes of die-hard Republicans, the terms Free Stater and traitor were one and the same. In light of all this, the graffiti salvage from Mountrivers Bridge is an important piece of West Clare's local heritage, which serves as a reminder of the bitter divisions that emerged within local communities during the birth of the Irish Free State and the 26th County Republic. The initials BF may refer to someone who repaired the bridge in 1923, and the words Free Stater may be a local IRA volunteer's opinion of this man. Or perhaps the graffiti was made during later repairs, after the war ended, when memories of which side people had taken were as fresh as the wet cement. Whatever the truth is, Mountrivers Bridge is an excellent example of how archaeology, the study of the past through the material remains people have left behind, can take unlikely forms, in this case, a piece of concrete graffiti. As I mentioned at the beginning, its significance has been formally recognized by the National Museum, who've declared it an archaeological object under the National Monuments Act, and it is presently in storage in the Clare Museum. The significance of the graffiti lies not only in what it might tell us about the experience and legacy of the Civil War and the War of Independence in West Clare, but also in what we still don't know. Just as we may never know for sure whose initials these are, or who adapted them to make a statement of allegiance, though local people and historians may well speculate, the full story of the Civil War may never be written. But in this era of centenary commemorations, as Ireland engages in a national conversation about this difficult period of our history, it's timely to have a local artifact to focus some of this discussion. So as well as being an archaeological object, the Mountrivers graffiti is also an important historical document that focuses our thoughts and discussion on a period of our history that we often tend to avoid. Thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed the paper. On screen now are some sources that we used in the research. And that concludes our talk. Thank you.